The morning mist hung heavy over the Ardennes forest on December 16, 1944, as American sentries peered through the frost-covered trees. Staff Sergeant William Johnson of the 106th Infantry Division pulled his woolen coat tighter against the bitter cold, unaware that this would be the last peaceful moment he would experience for weeks to come. Behind the German lines, Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt's forces had been gathering in absolute silence for months. Operation Watch on the Rhine, as Adolf Hitler had christened it, represented the Führer's desperate gamble to split the Allied forces and recapture the vital port of Antwerp. The German High Command had assembled over 200,000 troops, including elite Waffen-SS divisions and the fearsome King Tiger tanks of the 1st Panzer Division, Leib Standard, Adolf Hitler. According to military historian John Toland's comprehensive analysis in battle, The Story of the Bulge, the German preparation had been meticulous beyond anything the Allies had anticipated. Hitler himself had conceived this offensive as Germany's final chance to alter the course of the war in the West, believing that a decisive blow against the Americans would force a separate peace and allow Germany to concentrate fully against the advancing Soviet forces. Lieutenant Colonel Johann Peiper, commanding the 1st SS Panzer Regiment, received his orders directly from SS Oberfuhrer Wilhelm Mohnke. Break through American lines, seize the fuel depots at Spa, and drive toward the Meuse River bridges. Already notorious for his ruthless tactics on the Eastern Front, understood that speed would be everything. His battle group consisted of over 5,000 men, supported by the most advanced German armor available. The American 8th Corps, spread thinly across an 85-mile front, had been enjoying what they believed was a quiet sector. Major General Troy Middleton's forces included the untested 99th and 106th Infantry Divisions, along with the battle-weary 2nd and 28th Infantry Divisions, which had been sent to the Ardennes to recover from earlier fighting. The forest itself seemed to provide natural protection, with its dense woods and limited road network appearing unsuitable for major offensive operations. Private First Class Robert Martinez of the 99th Infantry Division remembered later how the night of December 15th had been unusually quiet. We could hear the wind through the pine trees, he would tell war correspondents months later. Some of the guys were writing letters home, talking about Christmas packages. Nobody expected what was coming. As dawn approached on December 16th, German artillery crews made their final preparations. Over 1,600 guns, mortar, and rocket launchers had been positioned along the front, hidden beneath camouflage nets and in carefully constructed bunkers. The preliminary bombardment would last 90 minutes. It's the most intensive artillery barrage the Western Front had witnessed since the Normandy landings. At exactly 5:30 in the morning, the silence of the Ardennes was shattered forever. The German barrage erupted with volcanic fury, illuminating the dark forest with flashes of orange and red. American positions disappeared in clouds of smoke and flying debris as high explosive shells rained down upon foxholes, command posts, and supply depots that had seemed secured just moments before. The battle that would reshape the final months of World War II had begun, and neither side yet understood the full magnitude of what was about to unfold in the frozen forests of Belgium and Luxembourg. The earth trembled beneath the tracks of 60-ton King Tiger tanks as Kampfgruppe Pipers smashed through the initial American defensive positions. By 7 in the morning of December 16th, the German spearhead had penetrated 3 miles into American territory, leaving behind burning vehicles and stunned survivors who struggled to comprehend the ferocity of the assault. Colonel Hurley, Fuller's 110th Infantry Regiment, found itself directly in the path of the German 5th Panzer Army. Fuller's men, many of whom had never experienced combat, watched in horror as Panzer IV and Panther tanks emerged from the morning, fog like prehistoric monsters. The regiment's anti-tank guns, designed to stop earlier German armor, proved woefully inadequate against the thick frontal armor of the attacking panzers. Staff Sergeant Johnson, who had been enjoying the quiet morning hours earlier, now found himself cut off from his company as German infantry poured through gaps in the American lines. The noise was indescribable, he would later recount 2 Stars and Stripes correspondent Andy Rooney. Machine guns, tank cannons, men screaming orders in German and English all mixed together. You couldn't tell which way was safe anymore. Lieutenant Colonel Piper's advance proved even more devastating than German planners had dared hope. His lead elements captured the town of Lanzarote by mid-morning, overwhelming the small American garrison before they could effectively call for artillery support. The SS officer pressed his advantage ruthlessly, knowing that every hour of delay would allow American reserves to organize effective resistance by noon. Reports of the German breakthrough were reaching Allied headquarters in Paris and London. General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, initially dismissed the attack as a limited German counteroffensive designed to relieve pressure on other sectors. Ike thought it was just a spoiling attack. General Omar Bradley would later write in his memoirs, "None of us understood that Hitler had committed his last strategic reserves to this offensive." The town of Malmedy became a crucial crossroads in the unfolding battle. Captain William Pergrin's 291st Engineer Combat Battalion had been working to improve the road network when German reconnaissance units appeared on the outskirts of town. Pergrin quickly organized his engineers into defensive positions, using their knowledge of explosives to create improvised roadblocks and minefields. Meanwhile, the American 106th Infantry Division was facing annihilation in the Schnee-Eifel, a ridgeline that had seemed like excellent defensive terrain, but now became a trap. Major General Alan Jones realized too late that his positions were being surrounded by German armor attacking from multiple directions. Two entire regiments, the 422nd and 423rd Infantry, found themselves cut off with no possibility of retreat. The German 6th Panzer Army, commanded by SS Arburst, Gruppenführer Joseph Dietrich, was making equally dramatic progress to the north. Elite units, like the 1st SS Panzer Division, Adolf Hitler, and the 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitler Youth, were advancing rapidly through the Losheim Gap. Exploiting the boundary between American corps where coordination was weakest, Private Martinez and his squad were among hundreds of American soldiers who found themselves behind German lines as the offensive gathered momentum. "We could hear German tanks moving past our position all night," he remembered. Every time we tried to move, there were more of them." It felt like the whole German army was pouring through the forest. As darkness fell on December 16th, the magnitude of the German success became apparent to Allied commanders. Entire American units had simply vanished from radio contact, while others reported being completely surrounded. The quiet sector of the Ardennes had become the focal point of Germany's last great gamble in the west. December 17th dawned with the sound of German tank engines echoing through the valleys of eastern Belgium. Kampfgruppe Piper had advanced over 20 miles in 36 hours, leaving a trail of destruction that would become one of the most controversial episodes of the entire war. At approximately 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Piper's spearhead encountered a convoy of the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion near the small crossroads south of Malmedy. Lieutenant Virgil Larry was commanding the lead vehicle when German Panzer IVs appeared around a bend in the road. Within minutes, the entire American convoy was surrounded, their light vehicles no match for German armor. Larry ordered his men to surrender, believing they would be treated according to the Geneva Convention. What happened next would shock the world and galvanize American resistance throughout the Ardennes. SS Sturmbannführer Werner Poch, commanding the 1st Battalion of the 1st SS Panzer Regiment, ordered the American prisoners to be assembled in a field adjacent to the crossroads. 84 American soldiers stood with their hands raised, believing they would be marched to prisoner-of-war camps behind German lines. Instead, at approximately 2:15 in the afternoon, machine guns opened fire on the helpless prisoners. Private Homer Ford would become one of only 43 survivors of what became known as the Malmedy Massacre. They just started shooting. Ford testified at war crimes trials after the war. "Men were falling all around me. I played dead in the snow until the Germans moved on, then crawled into the woods." Ford's testimony, along with that of other survivors, would lead to the prosecution of Piper and his subordinates for war crimes. The news of the massacre spread rapidly through American units, transforming the character of the battle. Colonel John Devine's 14th Cavalry Group received word of the atrocity within hours, and the information was passed down to individual soldiers. No prisoners became an unofficial but widely understood order among American troops, fundamentally altering the nature of combat in the Ardennes. Meanwhile, the strategic situation continued to deteriorate for Allied forces. The German 5th Panzer Army, commanded by General Hasso von Manteuffel, had achieved a clean breakthrough south of the initial assault zone. Manteufel's forces were advancing rapidly toward the Meuse River, threatening to cut off the entire American First Army from its supply bases. General Bradley, commanding the 12th Army Group, finally grasped the magnitude of the German offensive. "This is no local attack," he informed Eisenhower during a heated conference at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force in Versailles. "The Germans have committed everything they have left." Eisenhower, previously skeptical about the scope of German intentions, now authorized the commitment of strategic reserves, including the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions. The town of St. Vith had become a crucial strongpoint in the American defensive line. Brigadier General Bruce Clark's Combat Command B of the 7th Armored Division had arrived just in time to reinforce the surviving elements of the battered 106th Infantry Division. Clark, a veteran of North African and Italian campaigns, immediately recognized that St. Vith represented the key to the entire northern sector of the battle. "If we lose St. Vith, the whole line collapses," Clark radioed to his superior, Major General Robert Hasbrouck. The town sat at the junction of several major roads, and its loss would allow German armor to pour into the American rear areas. Virtually unopposed, Clark's tankers, supported by the remnants of Colonel Charles Cavender's 423rd Infantry Regiment, prepared for a desperate defense. As December 17th ended, German forces had achieved tactical successes beyond their most optimistic projections. However, the massacre at Malmedy had also ensured that American resistance would be far more determined than German commanders had anticipated. The battle was entering a new phase, one that would test the resolve of both sides to their absolute limits. The crossroads town of Bastogne emerged as the pivotal point of the entire Ardennes offensive as December 18th brought fresh snow and continued German advances. Major General Troy Middleton, commanding the 8th Corps, had recognized the strategic importance of this small Belgian town, where 7 major roads converged like spokes on a wheel. Without Bastogne, German armored spearheads would be forced to use secondary roads unsuitable for heavy tanks and supply vehicles. Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe of the 101st Airborne Division received emergency orders to deploy his paratroopers to Bastogne while German forces were still miles away. McAuliffe's men, veterans of the Normandy and Market Garden operations, had been resting near Reims when the call came. "Truck up! We're going to a place called Bastogne," McAuliffe announced to his regimental commanders. None of them had heard of the town, but they would soon make it famous. The race to Bastogne became a contest between American paratroopers traveling by truck and German panzers advancing cross-country. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Chapuis led the 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment into the town just hours before advance elements of the German 2nd Panzer Division appeared on the eastern approaches. Chapuis immediately ordered his men to establish defensive positions in the surrounding villages of Nauville, Longueville, and Warden. According to Stephen Ambrose's definitive account in Band of Brothers, the paratroopers found themselves facing a German force nearly 10 times their size, supported by armor they had no effective means of stopping. Major Richard Winters of Easy Company, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, later described the situation. "We had rifles, machine guns, and bazookas against Tiger tanks and assault guns. It was David versus Goliath, except David was surrounded." The German 47th Panzer Corps, commanded by General Heinrich von Luttwitz, has been specifically tasked with capturing Bastogne as quickly as possible. Luttwitz understood that every day the town remained in American hands delayed his advance toward the Meuse River. On December 21st, he decided to offer the Americans an opportunity to surrender before launching what he expected would be the final assault. Under a white flag of truce, German officers approached the American lines, carrying an ultimatum. "The fortune of war is changing," the document read. "There is only one possibility to save the encircled, say troops from total annihilation, the honorable surrender of the encircled town." The German message concluded with a warning that continued resistance would result in the complete destruction of Bastogne and its civilian population. General McAuliffe's response became one of the most famous moments in American military history. When his staff officers asked how they should reply to the German ultimatum, McAuliffe responded with a single word: nuts. Colonel Joseph Harper, commanding the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment, was tasked with delivering the official response to the waiting German officers. "If you don't understand what nuts means," Harper explained to the confused German major, "in plain English, it is the same as go to hell." The siege of Bastogne intensified dramatically. Following McAuliffe's rejection of surrender terms, German artillery pounded the town continuously, while Luftwaffe fighters strafed American positions whenever the weather permitted flying operations. The paratroopers, designed for brief operations behind enemy lines, found themselves in a prolonged defensive battle for which they were neither equipped nor supplied. Private Donald Burgett of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment described the conditions inside the perimeter. "We were running out of everything: ammunition, medical supplies, food. The wounded were piling up in the cellars and we didn't have enough morphine to ease their pain." But nobody talked about surrendering. McAuliffe had made it clear that wasn't an option. By December 22nd, German forces had completely encircled Bastogne, cutting off all ground supply routes. The fate of the garrison now depended entirely on airdrops, weather permitting, and the ability of General George Patton's Third Army to break through from the south. Inside the shrinking perimeter, American paratroopers prepared for what many believed would be their final battle, unaware that their desperate defense was buying precious time for Allied forces to reorganize throughout the Ardennes sector. General George Smith Patton Jr. stood before a map of the Ardennes on December 19th, his pearl-handled revolvers gleaming under the harsh lights of his command post. The flamboyant commander of the Third Army had just received the most challenging order of his career: execute a 90-degree turn with 3 entire divisions and drive north to relieve the besieged garrison at Bastogne. "Brad, this time the Kraut has stuck his head in a meat grinder," Patton told General Bradley, "and I've got hold of the handle." The logistical complexity of Patton's maneuver was staggering. The 4th Armored Division, 26th Infantry Division, 80th Infantry Division, totaling over 90,000 men with their supporting artillery, engineers, and supply units, had to be redirected from their planned offensive operations in the Saar region. Every fuel truck, ammunition, convoy, and medical unit required new routes and schedules. Major General John Wood, commanding the 4th Armored Division, received his orders directly from Patton during a late-night meeting at 3rd Army headquarters. "Woody, you're going to Bastogne," Patton announced without preamble. "I don't care if you lose every tank in your division, but you get through to McAuliffe's boys." Wood, a veteran of the breakout from Normandy and the drive across France, understood that this would be the most difficult mission his division had ever attempted. The attack began before dawn on December 22nd. Of the 4th Armored Division, leading the advance along the Ardennes-Bastogne Highway, Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding the 37th Tank Battalion, spearheaded the assault with his Sherman tanks grinding through fresh snow and German defensive positions. The advance proved costly from the first mile, as German anti-tank guns and Panzerfaust destroyed American armor faster than reserves could replace losses. Combat Command B, under Brigadier General Holmes Dager, attempted to outflank German positions by advancing through the villages of Bougainville and Essenois. Dager's forces encountered elements of the 5th Parachute Division, elite German troops who had been rushed from the Netherlands to reinforce the Bastogne perimeter. "Every house was a fortress," recalled Captain William Dwight of the 10th Armored Infantry Battalion. The Germans had turned these little Belgian villages into killing zones. Inside Bastogne, the situation grew more desperate with each passing hour. Medical supplies had run critically low, forcing American medics to perform surgery without adequate anesthesia. Chaplain Francis Sampson of the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment moved continuously between aid stations, providing what comfort he could to wounded paratroopers. "I saw men die with remarkable courage," Sampson wrote in his diary. "They asked about their buddies, not about themselves." The weather on December 23rd finally cleared enough to permit supply drops and air support. Captain Willis McKinnon piloted one of the first C-47 transport aircraft to reach Bastogne, flying at minimal altitude through intense German anti-aircraft fire. "We could see the German positions surrounding the town," McKinnon reported after landing safely. In England, the paratroopers' perimeter looked like a tiny island in a sea of German forces. Meanwhile, Patton's forces continued their grinding advance against determined German resistance. The 35th Infantry Division, commanded by Major General Paul Bode, joined the attack on December 24th, adding fresh strength to the relief effort. However, German commanders had reinforced their blocking positions with additional artillery and the formidable Jagdpanzer tank destroyers, whose thick armor and powerful guns took a terrible toll on advancing American forces. Lieutenant Colonel Abrams received word on Christmas morning that his spearhead was within 5 miles of Bastogne, but German resistance showed no signs of weakening. The final approach to the town would require crossing open ground swept by German artillery fire from the surrounding hills. "It's going to be like charging across a bowling alley," Abrams told his tank commanders during their final briefing. "But those paratroopers are counting on us." At 4:30 in the afternoon, on December 26th, the lead tank of Company C, 37th Tank Battalion, broke through the German lines surrounding Bastogne. First Lieutenant Charles Bogus, commanding the Sherman tank Cobra King, established radio contact with American forces inside the perimeter. "Come on in," came the laconic reply from a paratrooper radio operator. "We've been waiting for you." The siege of Bastogne was over, but the Battle of the Bulge was far from finished. The breaking of the Bastogne siege on December 26th marked the beginning of the end for German hopes in the Ardennes, but desperate fighting continued as both sides committed their final reserves to the brutal winter campaign. Field Marshal Model, commanding German Army Group B, recognized that his forces had achieved their maximum penetration and were now vulnerable to Allied counterattacks from multiple directions. To the north, the German 1st SS Panzer Army found itself increasingly stalled before the towns of Malmedy and Stavlet. Kampfrup Peiper, which had advanced furthest toward the Meuse River, was now completely cut off near the village of Le Gleize. Lieutenant Colonel Peiper radioed his superiors on December 23rd, "Situation desperate, out of fuel. Recommend breakthrough to German lines on foot." The elite SS formation that had terrorized American defenders during the offensive's first days was now trapped and facing annihilation. Major Hal McCown of the 119th Infantry Regiment, who had been captured during the German advance, witnessed the disintegration of Peiper's forces firsthand. "The Germans were exhausted and demoralized," McCown testified after his liberation. "Many of them were just teenagers who looked like they hadn't eaten in days. The officers were talking about abandoning their heavy equipment and trying to escape." Through the forest, the American counteroffensive gained momentum throughout the final days of December. Lieutenant General Courtney Hodges, commanding the 1st Army, coordinated attacks by the 2nd and 3rd Armored Divisions designed to pinch off the German salient at its base. These veteran formations, rebuilt after heavy losses earlier in the campaign, now possessed overwhelming advantages in artillery support and air cover. The weather had become a crucial factor favoring Allied forces. Clear skies allowed the 9th Air Force to mount devastating attacks against German supply convoys and troop concentrations. Colonel Francis Gabreski, leading the 56th Fighter Group, described the target-rich environment. German vehicles were bumper to bumper on every road leading back to their lines. "We had so many targets we couldn't miss. It was like a turkey shoot." General Patton, never one to rest on his laurels, was already planning the next phase of operations. "Now we've got them where we want them," he announced to his staff officers. "The Kraut came out of his fortified positions to fight in the open. We're going to destroy every German division west of the Rhine." Patton's 3rd Army prepared to pivot from defensive operations around Bastogne to a general offensive aimed at eliminating the entire German salient. The town of Houffalize became the focal point of Allied efforts to cut off retreating German forces. This small Belgian community sat at the junction of roads leading back to German defensive positions along the Siegfried Line. If American forces could capture Houffalize quickly enough, thousands of German soldiers and hundreds of tanks would be trapped in what Allied commanders were calling the Bulge. Private First Class Kurt Vonnegut of the 106th Infantry Division, who had been captured during the battle's opening days, experienced the German retreat from a prisoner's perspective. The guards were more scared than we were. Vonnegut would later write, "They kept looking over their shoulders, expecting American tanks to appear at any moment. Discipline was breaking down, and everyone knew the war was lost." On New Year's Day 1945, the Luftwaffe launched Operation Bodenplatte, a desperate attempt to regain air superiority over the battlefield. Nearly 800 German fighters attacked Allied airfields across Belgium and the Netherlands. In a coordinated surprise assault, the operation achieved tactical surprise and destroyed approximately 300 Allied aircraft on the ground. But the Luftwaffe lost nearly 300 fighters and pilots it could not replace. As January progressed, German resistance began to collapse throughout the Ardennes. Young soldiers who had been convinced they were participating in Germany's final victory now found themselves in full retreat. Harassed constantly by Allied aircraft and artillery, the Battle of the Bulge was entering its final phase, and the outcome was no longer in doubt. What remained was to determine how many lives would be lost before German forces could withdraw to their original positions. The final phase of the Ardennes campaign unfolded during the first weeks of January 1945. Allied forces methodically compressed the German salient while winter weather reached its most brutal intensity. Temperatures plummeted to 20 degrees below zero Fahrenheit, creating conditions that tested human endurance to its absolute limits. Both armies struggled with frostbite, equipment failures, and supply difficulties that often proved more dangerous than enemy action. First Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, whose tank battalion had broken through to Bastogne, now led the drive toward Houffalize as part of the broader Allied offensive to eliminate the Bulge entirely. The Germans were fighting hard, but you could see they were beaten, Abrams reported to 4th Armored Division headquarters. "Every time we advanced, we found more abandoned equipment and fewer prisoners willing to fight." The link-up between American forces attacking from north and south came on January 16th. Patrols from the 82nd Airborne Division met elements of the 11th Armored Division near the village of Houffalize. The German salient had been cut in half, trapping thousands of Wehrmacht and SS soldiers who had been unable to withdraw in time. The symbolic importance of this moment was not lost on Allied commanders, who recognized that Germany's last strategic reserve in the West had been effectively destroyed. General Eisenhower visited the front lines during the final days of January. Witnessing firsthand the price both sides had paid for Hitler's desperate gamble, the battlefield was littered with destroyed vehicles and equipment, Eisenhower noted in his diary. American and German tanks sat side by side, knocked out by anti-tank fire or abandoned when their crews ran out of fuel. It looked like a vast graveyard of modern warfare. The human cost of the Ardennes campaign proved staggering for both armies. American casualties totaled approximately 19,000 killed, 47,000 wounded, and 23,000 missing or captured, making the Battle of the Bulge the bloodiest single engagement fought by United States forces during World War II. German losses were equally severe, with an estimated 25,000 killed and enormous numbers of tanks, artillery pieces, and vehicles destroyed or abandoned. Field Marshal Model, whose Army Group B had spearheaded the offensive, submitted his final report to Hitler on January 28th. "The attack has failed to achieve its strategic objectives," Model concluded. "German forces have been withdrawn to their original positions, but at enormous cost in personnel and equipment that cannot be replaced." Hitler's response was to relieve Model of command and order him to report to Berlin for consultation. Captain William Pergrin of the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion would help defend Malmedy during the battle's opening phase, surveyed the aftermath as his unit cleared roadblocks and repaired bridges. "The destruction was incredible," Pergrin remembered. Entire villages had been leveled by artillery fire. The civilian population had suffered terribly, caught between two armies fighting for every house and crossroads. The Battle of the Bulge officially ended on January 25, 1945, when the last German forces withdrew across the Aar River to their original starting positions. The offensive had lasted exactly 40 days and had achieved none of its strategic objectives. Instead of splitting Allied forces and capturing Antwerp, German commanders found themselves facing a reinvigorated enemy armed with valuable experience in winter warfare. Lieutenant Colonel Piper, who had escaped from La Glaise with 800 survivors of his original battle group, was captured 3 months later and eventually tried for war crimes related to the Malmedy massacre. His testimony revealed the desperation that had driven German planning. We knew this was our last chance to change the course of the war. When it failed, everyone understood that Germany's defeat was inevitable. The strategic implications of Germany's failure in the Ardennes extended far beyond the immediate battlefield. Hitler had committed his final reserves to an offensive that not only failed but also weakened German defenses along the entire Western Front. When Allied forces resumed their advance toward the Rhine River in February 1945, they faced an enemy whose strength had been irreparably broken in the snowy forests of Belgium and Luxembourg. The Battle of the Bulge had indeed changed World War II, though not in the way German planners had envisioned. Instead of prolonging the conflict, the failed offensive had hastened Germany's final collapse and demonstrated to the world that the Wehrmacht was no longer capable of strategic offensive operations. The road to Berlin now lay open, and the end of the war in Europe was only months away.